Hello folks, Mark back with another vinyl update. This one is highlighting some of the used records I've picked up over the past year, really since last April, but I'm going to show some of the highlights of things I picked up. Again, I promised last week I would do this one, and I'm going to go ahead and deliver because the next couple weeks are going to get pretty fast paced. I go to Dallas on Friday of next week, and I'll be there for the week to see friends and family for the holiday, and then back on the 27th back here in Cleveland. So it'll be nice to come back on. I'll be back on Friday the 27th. It'll be nice to come back for a couple of days on the weekend to chill out before I go back into work on Monday. So hope you all are doing well. Hope the holidays aren't too stressful on you. I know they can get that way. So music always helps. So take time out and spin a couple records if you absolutely can. That's what I plan to do for the next few days. So anyway, I won't delay any further. Got a few things to go through, so let's look at what I got. First thing I just picked up last weekend. This is Weekend. See what I did there? Picked it up last weekend. Weekend is a trio, Allison Staton, who used to be in Young Marble Giants, and then I think Philip Moxham, who was also in Young Marble Giants, and then Simon Booth, an instrumentalist. They formed this band after Young Marble Giants split and got in a more jazzy direction. If you like everything but the girls' early stuff, like Eden, even Sade, that kind of stuff, check out Weekend. Really good stuff. And they have an album, which is really good, called La Variety, and then also a couple of singles. And then this live EP, live at Ronnie Scott's. I never had it, and it sounds really great. So found it for a good price, and it's on Rough Trade. So Simon Booth, I mentioned, was the third member of that band. Well, after Weekend finished up, which was only, for a short while, he formed Working Week. See what he did there, Weekend to Working Week. And they went on and did a couple of albums. One of them even featured Tracy Thorn from Everything But the Girl, and continued on in that jazzy vein. Again, I say Sade, but if you're into Diamond Life by Sade, check out Working Week. Really good stuff. Jazzy, but with a lot of Latin influences as well. And this is their album, Working Nights. Fantastic stuff. I'm a big fan of them, so I was glad to track this album down after having a lot of their 12-inch EPs. Found a part 2 of this. This is Act, Absolutely Immune. It's Klaudia Broken. She used to be the singer in Propaganda. She also went solo, but in between that, she had a duo called Act, signed to ZTT, and the other person in the band was Thomas Lear, who is a synth player from the late 70s, early 80s, one of the early synth pioneers in the UK, along with OMD and Human League. And they got together and did one album and several 12-inch singles together. I had part 1 of this back when it came out in 1987, but I knew there was a part 2, never had it. Finally found it for a good price. And found this one for a good price, one of Madness's later 12-inches from, I think, 1985. Yeah, it's called Yesterday's Men. They look a little bit serious on the cover, and I avoided it when it came out because it looked like it might be kind of boring. I have not heard this yet. I only got it last weekend, so I'm going to be spinning this one this coming week and weekend. Finally got a copy of this on vinyl, Emotion Lotion by the band Top. They're a Liverpool band. They only did this one album back in 91, I believe it was, yeah. And I had the cassette of it back then, wore it out, loved it, but just never got always wanted it on vinyl, but never could find it. So I found this over in Canada when I went there last summer. And good stuff. They're a Liverpool band made up of ex-members of Pale Fountains, and but don't sound a lot like that. They're more closer to like The Farm and Happy Mondays and that Manchester sound. They definitely have that going on. If you're into The Farm, check out Top, Emotion Lotion. And this, I never owned a copy of this. Have it on CD, and I have every other Ultravox on vinyl, but never had the first one. But found it for a good price just about a couple weeks ago, and it's in pretty decent shape. And this is the first Ultravox album, a lot more guitar-oriented than they would later be known for. They'd be known for being more of a synth act. But this album came out in, was it 77 or 78? It was one of those years, and now I really got to know. 77. And is a lot more straightforward guitar-oriented, but with some synth flourishes in it. So, good stuff if you like it. John Fox would later go on, this guy here would later go solo, and Midge, of course, would replace him, and they would have further chart success. Another one I've had on CD forever, but never owned on vinyl, Harmonia. And this is, I believe, their second album called Deluxe. And this is a reissue. Got this in Chicago a couple months back, and I could play this over and over again. So relaxing, so chill. Good mix of synthesizers and some lightly treated guitars, instrumental. And this is members of Cluster and also Noi. So if you're into krautrock, you probably already know about Harmonia, but if you don't, check this out. Their debut is called Music von Harmonia, and I got a copy of that too, but thought I'd only just show this one. Fantastic stuff. They later did an album with Brian Eno about 1977, and that was good too. Here's kind of a stoner rock group. They're kind of a metal band called Holy Serpent. They're from Australia. Got turned on to them in the YouTube vinyl community. Somebody showed their album. I forget who, but somebody showed their album, and I took a listen. It's great. So if you're into sleep or, you know, I'm just trying to think of Earthless, any of that, you know, modern, even New King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, check out Holy Serpent. This is really good stuff. It's on the Riding Easy label, which has put out the Brown Acid compilations of heavy, heavy rock. So check them out. It's Holy Serpent. And then continuing with the Cabaret Voltaire stuff, I got from Electropop to Technopop. This is a double album collecting 7-inch versions and random album cuts from the early to mid 80s. Even the late 70s, I see Do the Mussolinis on here from 78. And it just contains a lot of the 7-inch versions of songs that they would be known for 12-inch versions. So it's a good introduction, actually. If you've never heard Cabaret Voltaire or kind of been wanting to get into them, get this. This is a great introduction to them. 5 songs on each side, and it really gives you a sense of their electro sensibilities and also their more found sound and esoteric sounds. So there you go. A band very much like Cabaret Voltaire, Chak, was finally able to find their double album, their only album that I know of. This came out in, I believe, 86. Yeah. And they were, they had their own label called the Fawn record label, which Cabaret Voltaire have recorded at. They did their Code album there. And they're a lot like Cabaret Voltaire, but a little more funky, a little more industrial funk. So if you're into that kind of thing, check out Chak. This is their album, 10 Days in an Elevator. Now this I picked up, this Bee Gees album. I really like the Bee Gees. And this album I got because I really fell in love with the track You Win Again. Came across it on YouTube, never really gave it the time of day. Came out in like 87, 88, and I just got so hooked on it. So I found this album super cheap, and it's really good. And there's a song on here in particular that I love called The Longest Night. So if you want to hear some really prime Bee Gees, and this has nothing to do with disco, this is just showing off how great their songwriting is, check out The Longest Night by the Bee Gees on YouTube. Beautiful, beautiful song showing off their wonderful voices. Rest in peace, Robin and Morris Gibb. Here's a Martha and the Muffins album I didn't have. I think the only one I didn't have. This is the Ice Age. I had a copy on cassette way back and was kind of holding out to find a nice import copy for a decent price, and I found one. And this is their second album on Virgin Disc, 1981. A little bit of synth pop, some post-punk sensibilities as well. I don't know what else to say about it, just good, catchy new wave from the early 1980s. And they're actually Canadian. Here's something else I've been wanting for a while, James White and the Blacks, and it's Off-White. And the song Contort Yourself is definitely one you need to hear. Atonal saxophone over some herky-jerky, funky rhythms that it's a challenging listen, but it's a good listen. And once you get into it, you really get into it. So this guy was formerly in a band called the Contortions. Well, James White and the Contortions. And they were real big on the New York no-wave scene, along with Lydia Lunch and DNA and those types. So if you like kind of confrontational funk, jazzy funk, but with a post-punk raw feel to it, check out James White and the Blacks. Then a 12-inch by Dexy's Midnight Runners. I try and grab stuff by them when I see it. This one's called Let's Get This Straight from the Start. One of their transitional songs from when they were a little more soul-oriented in the early 80s to when they did Come On Eileen, when they got a little more Celtic in their influences. So I dig it. It's called Let's Get This Straight from the Start. Then Dump Truck. This was a college rock band from the 1980s. Jangly, kind of a little like Let's Active and REM, that kind of a thing. They were American. I forget exactly where they were from, but this is produced by Don Dixon, so if you know his work, then this should tell you everything. Never owned anything by him, so I thought I'd pick this up, and it was a good listen. Positively Dump Truck, jangly guitar pop from the 80s. And then this guy, just found this recently, Boris Mcculloch, never heard of him. This is an album called Heresy, and he is, I believe, a Belgian. And this album is very much in the vein of late 80s electronic body music. If you were into a Split Second or Neon Judgment, that dark synth wave sound with a lot of heavy beats. Check this album out if you're into that stuff. Front 242 even, if that's your vibe. This came out in 90, and the label, I'm not seeing, Played Again Sam Records. So there you go. Played Again Sam put out a lot of this type of stuff in the late 1980s, early 90s. Take a little sip here. And we'll continue on. This was nice to find. I have the 7-inch of this, Rescue by Echo and the Bunnymen. It was nice to find a 12-inch of it. And the B-sides are really good. Simple Stuff, which is on the 7-inch, and then Pride, which is on the US edition of Crocodiles. Fantastic songs from probably one of my favorite, probably my favorite era of Echo and the Bunnymen, that first album. I really, really love Crocodiles. So if you're not familiar with Echo and the Bunnymen, I'm sure you are, but if you aren't, and are kind of wanting to get in someplace, check out the first album, Crocodiles, and Rescue is definitely one of their most iconic tunes. Found this recently, the first Blue Aeroplanes album, Bop Art. This came out in the early 80s, and is a little more art rock than they would become. They would get a lot janglier in the late 1980s, but good band out of Bristol, England. There's like 8 members of the group, and Gerard Langley is their singer, who kind of speaks poetry over their sort of art rock music. So good stuff. I was glad to find a vinyl copy of this, had it on CD. Talked about Pale Fountains earlier. I love them. Liverpool Ban from the mid-1980s. This is one of their more poppy, jangly, with a lot of trumpet in it, tunes from Across the Kitchen Table, title track from their second and last album. I never had the 12-inch of this. It was good to have it extended. And I love the sleeve art as well. So that came out in 1985. Leader Michael Head and his brother John would later form the band Shack. And Michael Head records now solo. The only Talking Heads album I didn't have, Fear of Music, kind of, again, like I was mentioning earlier, I was holding, on another album, I was holding out for a nice clean copy of this with the perforated sleeve, or the embossed sleeve, I'm sorry, not perforated. See how it's kind of embossed? So I really like this album, never even owned it on CD, had it digitally, but was glad to get a copy of this. Fantastic record. The song Take Me to the River is the one that you'll probably know. I'm trying to see if you know anything else. I'm sorry, Take Me to the River is not on here. It's Life During Wartime. I get it confused. So anyway, if you're into kind of nervous, herky-jerky new wave, Talking Heads pretty much defined it with this album, Fear of Music from '79. Another band I've been filling in the holes with is Sparks, and here's one they did for Columbia in '77, Introducing Sparks. If you're not familiar with them, do check them out. Their 70s output is really good, and they went a little more synth pop in the 1980s. So every Sparks record's a little bit different. They like to cover different ground with every album, and so to me that's what makes them very exciting. So anyway, I was glad to get a copy of this. A couple of 12-inch singles. Karen Wheeler, she used to be in Soul to Soul. This was her debut 12-inch, Living in the Light. If you're into, danceable R&B, trying to figure out a better way to describe it, check out Living in the Light and Karen Wheeler. She's really a remarkable voice. She's the one singing on their big hit, Back to Life, and also Keep on Moving. Go West, Call Me, duo from the mid-80s. Not a huge fan of this group, but I really like this song, Call Me. So I found the 12-inch for $1. Slick 80s dance pop. Go West. Here's a band from, oh gosh, where are they from? I can't actually remember. They're called The Ripe. I want to say they're Australian, but good jangly kind of psychedelic pop. And I have their one of their albums, which I liked a lot, and found an EP by them, so I picked it up. This is called, what is it called? Man with No Eyes. Jangly guitar pop. Best way to describe them. Come Home by James. Huge fan of them, and I never had this 12-inch mix with a live version of Stutter on the back. So it's good to have this. Same with Charlatans, found a couple of theirs then, and also Me in Time. I had the 7-inch of this, but it was nice to get the 12-inch with an extra song, and then has a nice B-side as well. Big fan of the Charlatans, was glad to fill in some holes with these 12-inch singles. Hula, I mentioned bands from Sheffield, Chack, and Cabaret Voltaire. Well, Hula are definitely in that vibe, and this is the one missing album I didn't have by them. It's a live record they did in 1986, and it's 1 track per side. So it's definitely not an essential listen by Hula. If you're wanting to get into them, check out a US released album called Threshold, which collects a lot of their 12-inch singles and album cuts. That's a better example of what they're about. This is more experimental, you know, a lot of found sound, and you know, I found it for a good price, but it was never high on my list of Hula records to buy, so it's kind of why it took me so long to get it. But glad to have a copy of it. More synth pop from the 80s. Boxcar. This is an album, I think they're Canadian. No, they're Australian. And just good danceable synth pop if you're into things like Anything Box or Cause and Effect, Depeche Mode even from the late 80s. You know, good, just good dark, not really even dark, more just alternative synth pop. Check out Boxcar. Erasure, if you're a fan of them, might like them. Sweet Exorcist found a 12-inch by them. This is called Testimony. No, it's called Test 1 remixes. So there's like Test 4, Test 5, Test 6. Those are the different cuts on here. Minimal synth music with a lot of danceable rhythms. This is Richard Kirk, one half of Cabaret Voltaire, name that keeps coming up in this video. And this is a 12-inch I never had of him, so I was glad to get a copy. Dr. Calculus found this over in the UK. This is an album called Designer Beatnik, and this is Stephen Tintin Duffy, or just Stephen Duffy. He used to go by Tintin Duffy. And then he formed the Lilac Time and went in more good. So when he was Tintin Duffy, he was more synth pop. When he was Lilac Time, he formed the band the Lilac Time in the late 80s through up to now. They're more folky and jangly. Well, in between that, he did an album under the name Dr. Calculus, which is a lot more experimental. Still danceable in parts, but more similar to Art of Noise in their more experimental moments. So if you're a fan of Art of Noise, that's a really good comparison to this record, Dr. Calculus. The only album he did under this name, and this came out, I believe, in 85. Yeah, no, 86. Another find from the UK, The Hypnotics, a band I've been kind of wanting to get into for a long time, but just never find their stuff around. So here's a 12-inch called Soul Trade. Very garage rock, if you're into things like the fuzz tones or even loop. You know, they have they're garagey, but with a psychedelic edge to them. And if you're into the Stooges, then you definitely would like The Hypnotics. And don't forget, there's an extra E in there, The Hypnotics. Just a 12-inch by them, but I liked it a lot, so I'll be on the lookout for more stuff by them. They had quite a few albums from what I recall, so... Rest in peace, Pete Shelley. He died about a year ago, and I never got around to getting his second album, XL1, so I finally found a decent copy of this. Good shape, and for a good price. It's good synth pop, produced by Martin Russian, straight off of his success with the Human League. So if you're into synth pop like the Human League, check out Pete Shelley's solo album, XL1. Very unlike the Buzzcocks, not very much like that. So Telephone Operator is the main single from this. And then I'll show these all at once. One of our local used record stores, somebody dumped off a whole bunch of old house records, house 12-inch singles and house compilations. And when I say house, I'm talking about the original house from the late 1980s and like 86 and on from Chicago. So I found like the best of house, found multiple collections with luminaries like Marshall Jefferson, Rays, T-Coy. Those are the main artists I know on this one. And then Chicago Tracks. There's a couple volumes of that. This is volume 2 that I'm showing. And great stuff on here. Children of the Night by Kevin Irving. An iconic track from the house era if you're interested in what that's about. Baby Wants to Ride by Jamie Principle. That's on here. Also, Do It Properly by Adonis is another banger. Just good minimal synth dance music. Extremely minimal. I mean, it's very repetitive, but if you're into it, you're into it. So Chicago Tracks, and then also the house sound of Chicago. This is a sort of a collection of 12-inch stuff that came out over in the UK onto an album. And it includes Baby Wants to Ride, that I just mentioned, Frankie Knuckles, he's another one, Sterling Void. So there's a lot of great stuff to be found in these compilations. So was glad to pick these up and got them all real cheap. All right, a few more to show here. I've hit the 20-minute mark, so I will hustle through these last few. Multicolored Shades. This is a band from, I don't forget where they're even from. I think they're German. And they harken back to the 60s with that kind of Hammond organ garage rock sound. And but they're from the 1980s, and this is their lone album, the only one I know of, Sundome City Exit, the Multicolored Shades, an 80s band that harkens back to the 60s. Sounds like my kind of thing. And then here's a couple of similar albums. The Peppermint Trolley Company, sort of a sunshine pop bubblegum 60s band, most well known for doing the theme song to the Brady Bunch. That is the Peppermint Trolley Company. But they have a lot of other great songs on their album, mainly Baby You Go Rollin' Across My Mind. That's a fantastic soft sunshine pop tune. The Peppermint Trolley Company. There is a reissue of this on CD which contains bonus tracks, but this is the original vinyl. And another band just like them, I think from the New York City area, or maybe Boston. I forget where they're actually from, but now a band called the Blades of Grass. And this is their album, The Blades of Grass Are Not for Smoking. And they're a similar deal to Peppermint Trolley Company. Sunshine pop, lots of vocal harmonies, nothing that rocks. It's not going to rock you. It's going to mellow you. So if you're into that kind of thing, check them out, The Blades of Grass. Here's an album I've seen shown a million times in the vinyl group and on Instagram, this Mcdonald and Giles album. Now, I've seen this around through the years, but from the cover, I just always assumed it was going to be a folky album. They look like they would be like a Ian and Sylvia type, or, you know, Carly Simon and James Taylor. I don't know. It just seemed like it would be something like that. Well, I later found out it's actually a couple of ex-members of King Crimson, and it's a very progressive album. It's progressive rock. The album came out, I believe, in 72 or 73. I'm trying to remember the exact year. Oh, 71. And it's on Cotillion. So that should kind of tell you something there. It's definitely, if you're a fan of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, that kind of stuff, this is definitely more your vibe. I enjoyed it too. I did enjoy it. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I did enjoy the record. It was a nice mellow listen. Here's something I heard recently, Day Blindness. This is from 1969. I believe it was like a Private Press album, but this is a reissue. And good bluesy, psychedelic rock, just with a lot of Hammond organ and a lot of really freaked out, fuzzed out guitar solos, but then they get kind of bluesy as well. So check them out if you can. If you're into that late 60s, early 70s kind of acid rock thing, Day Blindness. This is the only album that they have that I know of. And if you want to start somewhere with them, look up the song Holy Land. Whew, it cooks. It's a 12-minute song, but about halfway through, it takes off, and it's amazing. Then here's something I've been after for a while. I've had this on CD. This is saxophonist Ronnie Laws and his album Pressure Sensitive, and I got this because the first track on here, Always There, is just completely bonkers. I love it. It's just a really great slam and dance funk tune with his sax wailing all over it, and can't say enough about it. The whole album is really good too. And it came out, I think, in 74? I could be wrong. I'm looking for a date on here. 75, and this is a reissue on the Liberty label. If you're into reggae, I always say check out anything on the Studio One label. And this is a Best of Studio One, Volume 2. So it had a lot of really great tracks on it. A couple that I already knew, and then some that I didn't know. The Paragons in particular I like. Culture. I'm trying to see anybody else on here that I knew previous to buying this album. Sound Dimension, I knew them. But that was it. The rest of it I didn't know. So it's always good to discover some new old reggae. This all dates back to the 1970s. Carmel, she was, I mentioned Working Week and Weekend back there. She was part of that whole scene in the early, like 84, where kind of all those jazzy bands emerged out of the UK, like Sade and Everything But the Girl and the Blow Monkeys, Style Council. If you're into all of that stuff, check out Carmel. She's great. wonderful voice, and just great jazzy stuff. This is their first album. The drum is everything, and if you want to know what she's all about, check out the song More, More, More. That's I have the 45 of that, and I've had it since it came out, but never did have the album, so it was good to get a copy of The Drum is Everything by Carmel. Fats Comet, this is just good dance music from the late 1980s. The crew from Tackhead are very much involved in this. Gary Clayle, Skip McDonald, Doug Wimbish, all of those people. If you were buying Tackhead records in the late 1980s, then you may be familiar with Fats Comet. Gary Clayle, all that crowd. Just good stuff. This is called DJ's Dream. Carried this at a record store I worked at back in the 80s, and never did buy it. Found it for a good price, and I picked it up. Band called Dole. They were produced by Adrian Borland of The Sound. That's what sold me on them. I think they might be Canadian. And this dates back to 1986. Another record I remember carrying back at the record store I worked at back in the 80s, but never picked up. So it's always been kind of in the back of my mind that if I ever see it, get it. And that I did. I was in Canada just this past summer. Went and saw Grace Jones in Detroit, and I just popped over the bridge to a couple of record stores in Canada and found this. Another Canadian find, Fingerprints, their second album called Distinguishing Marks, Scottish group. Biggest hit from here was Bulletproof Heart, which all ties in because I just said I went to Detroit to see Grace Jones. Grace Jones did a version of Bulletproof Heart from this album. Everything ties together if you just look. Anyway, Fingerprints did another album after this called Bête Noire, I think that's how you pronounce it, which was a lot more disco. Had a very like four-to-the-floor disco feel to it. I liked it. But this is definitely more of a post-punk guitar-based album. They later would turn into, a couple of the band members would morph into another band in the late 80s called the Silencers. And they also did a version of Bulletproof Heart. Can't get away from that song. A couple of 12 inches I found. I don't know a lot about them. This is Trading Love by Florence. Great Italo disco synth pop. Again, if you're into Depeche Mode and Erasure and that kind of thing, this is a fantastic slice of 80s synth pop. And then this is just good mid-80s funk, disco funk by Unlimited Touch. It's called Searching for the Right One. And I really love four-to-the-floor disco. I just think the sound of it is so physical, and really have kind of been getting into finding a lot of dollar 12-inch singles like this lately. So if you're into disco, check out Unlimited Touch, Searching for the Right One. Couple more, 4 more records here. Deep Purple, been getting into them more and more over the past few years. Found a good copy of Machine Head, which of course has the classic track Smoke on the Water, but also has Highway Star and Lazy, and the whole thing is solid back to front. So finally glad to get a copy of Machine Head by Deep Purple. Flying Lizards, this is their second album, Fourth Wall, a little more experimental than their first one. The first one had hits like Money on it and was very much associated with new wave and synth pop in early 1980s. This came out, I believe, in 81 or 82. I cannot recall, and I don't see a date on here. But it's got a lot of the hallmarks from the first album. If you like the first Flying Lizards record, then you'll probably like this one. But it's a little more experimental. But I liked it a lot. A lot of dub influences on this as well. Athens, Georgia band Love Tractor. Another group I just kind of snoozed on in the 80s and have been going back and picking up their stuff when I see it. And this is an album they did called This Ain't No Outer Spaceship. A lot of great guitar work, a largely instrumental band, but there are some vocals on this, and they're from Athens, Georgia. So if you're into things like REM, and what's the band I mentioned earlier, Dump Truck, check out Love Tractor. They're very much the college rock thing from the 1980s. And then finally, a 4-track EP by Cute Heels. This is called Third Skin, and it's a minimal synth dark wave is probably the best way to describe it. And it comes out on the wonderful Dark Entries label, which I mentioned in the last video. A label that reissues a lot of synth pop, dark wave, and post-punk from around the world. So this is no exception. Cute Heels. I have an album by them as well. And yeah, good. If you're into more modern acts like Zeno and Oaklander, check these guys out. Or even the KVB. You might like the Cute Heels. So there you go. Here we are at almost 30 minutes. I had plenty more to show, but I figure this is probably plenty. So if I get an itch, I will do another video. If not, then I'll see you after the new year. And everyone, you have a great holiday. Stay safe and keep spinning vinyl. Bye.